Alright, so I am going to be presenting my final media clip project. My name is Melissa Genoble. So for our first question, we were asked about the least restrictive environment and how it relates to the model of delivery for special services. So the least restrictive environment is what environment makes it as close to the general ed classroom that is feasible for that child. Because the ultimate goal is to have the child in a general education classroom learning with their peers, and not in a secluded environment. That is not the least restrictive environment to have a kid in a sped classroom all day, unless there is no other option. So the least restrictive environment is to help the student advance towards the annual goals that are outlined in the IEP. So they should be steadily making progression at all times. That also helps progress them towards the general education curriculum. To qualify for an IEP, you are obviously below general education curriculum standards. However, we should be trying to move closer to that instead of falling further and further behind. We're trying to lessen the gap instead of widening it. The least restrictive environment also allows for the students to be involved in extracurricular and non-academic activities with their peers. For example, if there is a field trip, even if, let's say you have a sixth grader and all sixth grade students are going on a field trip to enhance their social studies lesson. Even if that student is not in the general ed classroom for for social studies, that student should be allowed to go on the field trip. The exception to that is if a parent says, no, I don't want my student going, or no, I don't feel like that is feasible for my child. If it's feasible for the child to go, they need to be going. And then the student, as stated before, should be educated and be able to participate with both disabled and non-disabled students. So they should not be with just disabled students all day. They should have some time with the peers of their age, even if that's specials and lunch, before school, after school, those things, in not necessarily an academic setting, but time with them. So, moving on to question 2, it asked about the why is the assessment process described as a cycle, and what are the components of it, of the special education process. So I would like to kind of flip that question, and first talk about the components and then why it is a cycle. So the first component of the assessment process is the identification and referral of the student. So either identification and referral by a school staff member or that works with the child, or by the parent. The parent can begin the process, which a lot of parents don't realize. From there, we go to the determination and eligibility, which is where they start testing the student and deciding, is this student actually eligible for an IEP or special education services. From there, if it's decided that yes, they do meet the eligibility requirements, then it goes on to program planning, where they start to assemble a plan for this child, an academic plan. After they assemble the academic plan, they go over it with the parents. They do the IEP, then they do implementation and evaluation. So they then implement the IEP that has been signed by members of the school and by the parents and agreed upon. They implement and then they evaluate. And as they're constantly evaluating, they're determining whether this IEP is still relevant, if these services are still adequate for the child. And then it's a cycle, because if at any time the services aren't fitting the child, then we then go back kind of through the steps. Not necessarily the first steps, but definitely the eligibility for that service, and then a new program potentially as well. So it's an ever going cycle. And kids are constantly moving in and out of the assessment process, because if at some point a child or a student goes into it, it's determined at that time they're not eligible, they can then be reevaluated later on in life to determine eligibility later on if they're still presenting deficits. So the third question was, describe at least 5 strategies a professional can use to encourage family participation in special education assessment process. So family participation is so important, because nobody knows that student better than their parents. Even if there's differences between home life and school and how the child interacts and how the child acts in general, that parent knows their child better than anybody. So having the open communication with them is key. Is key to getting the process started. Is key to completing evaluations and to getting their input on what they feel like will be the best way to address an issue, or to make sure like you're covering all your bases, culturally, linguistically, etc. So that's really like step number 1. Like you have to have that super good communication with those parents. Going into what really helps make those family connections, to make that family participation even stronger. You want commitment on your part. You have to show them that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. Once you break your commitment to them, then that goes to like number 5, the trust. The trust is broken. So you need, like, they all kind of tie in together. You have to give them the respect by giving them your word and keeping with it. Number 3 is equality. You need to treat them and their child as an equal. Their child, just because they have an IEP, does not make them a lesser than or a hindrance. They are equal to every other child in that building. So the parents, even if there is like a language barrier, they're also equal, and it is the school's job to find that interpreter or a way to communicate with the parents. Skills, you need to be making sure that you are skilled in the areas in which you're speaking. Nobody wants to hear somebody just making guesses out of thin air. You need to be skilled in the areas in which you're giving advice. And if you're not the speech pathologist, you probably should not be giving speech advice. You should let that resource, the speech pathologist give the advice on speech. The adaptive PE give the adaptive PE suggestions. So only speak on what you are skilled in. Trust, like I said, you want to have the parents trust. You don't want them to question whether or not you're there for their student, if you're there for them. They don't want to question what if there's an ulterior motive, so to speak. Respect, you need to give the parents and the students respect. They deserve it. It's You're not going to have that open communication, that full family participation without giving them respect. Then going on to number 4, we were to discuss the different 3 types of derived scores: percentile ranks, standard scores, and teens, how they're related to each other and to the normal distribution. So with all 3 of these, you can use like a bell curve. The percentile rates are based on the norm. So when you get a 64 percentile rank, that means you are performing, or your student is performing at the 64th percentile. So, 0 to 64. They perform better than 64% of the norm group. But they're not performing at the other 36%. 36% are performing higher than them of the normed reference group. So it's not like a pass-fail kind of thing. It's like, where are they in relation to the others in the norm group? And there is a separate table for different norm groups. So you can have like 0 to 6, or you can have just like first grade students. And not a range. And they'll be shown on different different tables. Standard scales. There is standard scores. There's a set mean and a set standard deviation, and it allows you to compare your student to themselves and then also to the norm group. So it's not in comparison to the norm group as far as like the percentile ranks. It really shows like the straight up scores. So like this is the average score of, they look at more of the score, like the percentages, correct. Say teens. So the breakdown is there's 9 segments to show the relationship between, say, teens percentile rank standard scores. Pretty much that is what ties this all together. And it shows in one nice little graph, percentile rank, standard scores. There's so much information that can be pulled from a teen. So it, like I said, it just kind of pulls it together. I don't really view it as its own thing. I kind of see it as a way to pull all the information you have into one to kind of compare and contrast the different scores. So yeah, so that is my presentation. I really enjoyed this class and I learned a lot from it. So thank you so much for all the effort you put into teaching this.